The most obvious place to force these crown corporations to save money, the most obvious place, just stop handing out bonuses when you fail to do your one and only job.
This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast, where we're dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. We're going to dig right into that accountability factor here, Franco. I'm Chris Sims. I'm here in Alberta. I'm the Alberta director. Franco is our federal director. Franco, Bank of Canada, I think, is probably one of your favorite topics because it's so crucial to how things run here in Canada. And recently, especially over the last year, it's been up in people's grill in Canada. It's in their face. It's affecting their bottom line because we've seen interest rates go up so much, so fast. Why does that bloody matter? Well, if you own a house, that really matters. If you're on a variable rate, you're getting nailed with that increase about every 2 months or so. And it's in some cases, hundreds of dollars extra you're paying on your mortgage because of that rate change. And guess what? If you are coming up for renewal on your fixed rate, brace yourselves. So this is really personal for a lot of Canadians, Franco, the failure of the Bank of Canada to keep interest rates low, especially when they told Canadians they were going to stay low for long. Franco, this was great work. What did you guys dig up in Ottawa on the Bank of Canada?
Well, we found the Bank of Canada handed out $20 million in bonuses in 2022. Now, bonuses are for people who do a good job, not for people who fail at their one and only job. Now, the Bank of Canada has one mandate, to keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, if you've been to the grocery store or a gas station in the last year, you know that the Bank of Canada failed to do that one job. Didn't matter. Bonuses anyway. $20 million in bonuses handed out to its central bankers in 2022. 80% of the workforce got a bonus. The average bonus last year was more than $11,000. Must be nice. $18 million was handed out in bonuses in 2021 and $16 million in bonuses handed out in 2020.
Stop. Okay. So I'm laughing because I'm furious. And if I get furious, the podcast is a lot less enjoyable. What makes me furious about this, on top of paying through the nose for a mortgage, is that they admitted that they screwed this up. Like, they full on fessed up. They said, you know what? Drop the ball. Shouldn't have done that. We screwed up. But they still gave themselves bonuses.
No kidding. I actually think that might be the craziest part. I mean, look, I get infuriated just hearing about the $20 million in bonuses when the Bank of Canada failed to do its only job. But the craziest part of the entire story is really an accountability issue or lack thereof, okay? Because, like, look, the Bank of Canada's own deputy governor acknowledged that they hadn't managed to hit their inflation target, their one and only job. I mean, no duh. And then went as far to say that Canada's central bank, the Bank of Canada, should be held accountable. Well, handing out big bonus checks to 80% of your workforce is a pretty odd way to hold your organization accountable. And look, like, no one's saying that Canada is the only place that saw this super high inflation. Nobody's saying that. I mean, a lot of other countries, when you run crazy deficits, print a whole bunch of money out of thin air and drop it into a lockdown economy. I mean, when other countries do similar policies, they get similar results, right? But look, it's not like Canada did good either. Okay, a January 2022 report from the Fraser Institute showed that there were 3 industrialized countries that had higher inflation in 2021 than in Canada. Now, I also did some digging into some international monetary fund data. So
on a Friday night, I just got to ask, like,
yeah. Sorry, can't go on a date tonight. I got some more fun stuff going on. So at 6.8% inflation, Canada's inflation rate last year was higher than 74 other countries, according to that data from the IMF. Many of our peer countries had lower inflation than Canada last year. Japan, 2.5%. Switzerland, 2.8%. Israel, 4.4%. Korea, 5.1%. And then you also had Norway, France, Singapore also having lower inflation than Canada did last year as well.
Okay. So that Japan number is looking pretty attractive. I really like Nintendo, like a lot. Like I might head over that way. I need to stress this, okay? Because a lot of people make decisions based on the actions or failures of the Bank of Canada. So back in the year 2020, harken back 3 years, the head of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, told the Finance Committee on Parliament Hill out loud with his face that inflation would remain low for a long time. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. He also said that the interest rate would remain at 0.25% into 2023. That also didn't happen because the Bank of Canada's interest rate right now has increased to 5% in 2023. So people make decisions based on the interest rate and where mortgage rates are going to be. And now they're really struggling to make ends meet. We're seeing some pretty alarming numbers, Franco, from people who bought a pretty darn expensive house because houses are pretty darn expensive in most popular cities like Vancouver and Toronto, especially, and their suburbs. And they signed on thinking that they'd be able to afford their mortgage payments. Now they've got much higher mortgage payments. And what's really infuriating is that Macklem, obviously, as the head of Bank of Canada, isn't just some schmuck. He's seen as the authority on inflation and interest rates in Canada. So all these financial experts, all these mortgage brokers who are giving their clients advice, listen real closely to what that guy says. And his incorrect statements are now making average Canadians pay a big price. Again, especially if you've bought a home in the last year. So, Franco, if the Bank of Canada is not going to hold itself accountable, so they totally screwed this up, then they gave themselves mega bonuses. Where can we turn to? Are there politicians that are going to hold something as big and important as the Bank of Canada accountable?
Okay, that's a great question. So remember, it was the Canadian Taxpayers Federation that dug up this information through a bunch of access to information requests. Now, right after that, we released this information that the Bank of Canada handed out 20 million in bonuses last year. Here's what the Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, said. I'm just going to read you a quote. Okay, here's what he said right after we released this information. This is outrageous. Trudeau's bankers should not be rewarded while working Canadians can't afford to pay their mortgages or put food on the table. My common sense Conservative government will put an end to Trudeau's big bonuses for government bankers and executives who fail at their jobs. Okay, that was what Poilievre said. Now, before that, though, I had also interviewed Poilievre in the past, and I asked him about the bonuses that are going on at some of these failing crown corporations. Here's what he said to me in that interview. Take a listen.
Well, I would cancel bonuses for failing government authorities, and that would include, for example, the Bank of Canada, CBC, and other organizations that have failed in their jobs throughout the pandemic. I don't think we should reward failure. And unfortunately, the reason why we have such a dysfunctional government is because there is no there's no accountability for failure.
Okay, it's really good to hear from Poilievre saying this, okay, because it sounds like we're on the same page about this issue. It's all well and good for the opposition to say it, but they're not the ones in power. What are the government parties, the ones with their hands on the control levers of this machine called Canada? What are they saying about this?
Well, in Budget 2023, our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, said the government plans to work with crown corporations to, quote, ensure they achieve comparable spending reductions, which would account for an estimated $1.3 billion over 4 years, end quote. Okay, so that's bureaucrat for we're going to work with crown corporations to make sure they save money and spend less. Now, the most obvious place to force these crown corporations to save money, the most obvious place, just stop handing out bonuses when you fail to do your one and only job.
So you've been digging around on this a lot. It isn't just the Bank of Canada that you've gone after. Rewarding failure with bonuses is kind of the rule and not the exception in Ottawa. Unfortunately, I lived there for a long time, and it's just par for the course. But Franco, you got some really specifics here based on your research that you guys have been doing out of the Ottawa office. Break down all the work that you guys have done, highlighting bonuses and that bonus money that is sloshing around in Ottawa.
Yeah. Okay. So like another Crown corporation that immediately comes to mind is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Okay. The CMHC, quote, exists for a single reason: to make housing affordable for everyone in Canada. That's according to its own website. Okay.
Wow. Now, you guys really didn't do that well, I must say.
Yeah. Well, so people can't afford homes in Canada. Yeah. I think we all know that.
Yeah.
And what did the CMHC do? Did they take pay cuts? Did they hold themselves accountable? No, they handed out $75 million in bonuses since the beginning of 2020. VRAIL. They also handed out bonuses, raises, and lavish executive pay while losing hundreds of millions of dollars and taking a big fat taxpayer bailout. Destination Canada. Chris, this one irks me. This one is a Crown corporation dedicated to promoting Canadian tourism. Okay? They're dedicated to promoting Canadian tourism.
Wait for it, folks. Wait for it.
They gave themselves bonuses and pay raises even when tourists were legally prohibited from traveling into Canada during the pandemic. Okay, how about this one?
Okay.
Freeland doled out an extra $42 million, quote, to help CBC Radio Canada recover from the pandemic, end quote. That was reported by National Post. Okay, so Freeland handed out CBC $42 million. The CBC handed out $46 million in bonuses since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, check out this great find from the investigative journalism service, our friends over at Blacklock's Reporter. I'm just going to quote them, okay? The Canada Infrastructure Bank last year paid bonuses to all 6 executives and every single manager at the equivalent of more than $85,000 apiece. Bonuses were paid even as Commons Committee recommended Parliament close the bank as a costly failure. Now, that's just the Crown corporations, but bonuses are also raining down within the government departments proper. Okay, so the feds have handed out $1.3 billion with a B dollars worth of bonuses since 2015, despite departments failing to meet 50% of their own performance targets each year consistently. Okay, so they're essentially getting bonuses, and it doesn't even matter if they can meet their own performance targets within the federal government.
I like how Blacklock's ended that quote of costly failure. Like that
kind of sounds like the whole federal government.
Yeah, I know. Like I'm thinking like the next time we fly a plane over top of Parliament Hill with one of those banner things, costly failure is probably a pretty good.
It's like that shirt, you know, like I'm with costly failure.
Nice. Well, not nice, but thank you for all this information. We need to remind you, listeners and viewers, we know sometimes this is tough to hear, but if you don't pay attention to this stuff, it's just going to get worse. And if you don't think it can get worse, you're wrong, because the government will continue to be a costly failure at a multiple level of increase. So, Franco, thanks for this. And I have to point out, we've got a piece in the Financial Post. Franco wrote a really good one, and we're going to include that in our show notes. Folks, if you're tired of getting screwed over with your taxes while bureaucrats treat themselves to bonuses and pay raises, head on over to our website and sign our petitions.